Right, we're joined for our latest interview with people from the world of football, and this time we're going a little bit left field. We've interviewed Derek Spence and Winston White and Lee Bracey and all the other Bury guys that we know and love, but this time we're going into the middle of the park, and we're going to interview one of the best referees I think I've ever seen in my life, Mr. Keith Hackett. Good evening, Keith.
Maurice, delighted. Good evening to be on your show.
Thanks very much for doing it. We're going to talk a little bit about your career. Now, you're a Sheffield lad.
Yeah.
How did you get into refereeing? Did you play before you refed, or how did that?
I played in local football, and then the idea was that at that time, the county F.A decided that one active person from every team would attend a referee's course. So I was the guy that was volunteered, went to Sheffield and Hallamshire County F.A and the Sheffield Referees Association, and spent 6 evenings listening to people talking about the 17 laws and how to apply them, and with no intentions of becoming a referee. This was what the club had to do. So I got back, and then we had a weekend without any games. I got a phone call on the Thursday from the County FA saying, Mr. Hackett, Hillsborough Boys Club versus Sheffield United Juniors, intake school, kick off 3 o'clock, and put the phone down. So I was somewhat stunned because I had no kit. Obviously, I got a pair of boots. I had no whistle, no watch, and borrowed everything. My dad's his regular pub was there was a referee in there called Bill Shirt, the late Bill Shirt, and Bill said, "Don't worry, I'll loan him everything. We're about the same size." And I'm 16, I think, 16, 17. Went out and refereed the game. At the end of the match, this guy came up and said, "Well done, thank you very much. Really enjoyed your performance." And he said, how long have you been refereeing? And I sort of said, well, this is my first game. And he looked quite stunned. That was really the start of it. And then something like 12 years in local football, refereeing on a Sunday morning, Saturday afternoon, and the occasional midweek. I refereed 5-a-side in midweek. All very enjoyable. I really loved it, and in fact gave up playing. I decided this was it. I really, as a player, you're involved in the game, but as a referee, you're absolutely in for the 90 minutes plus. And so I got into that and moved up into the Yorkshire League, which was the best amateur competition in the area. Occasional trips to Bridlington, and funnily enough, went out to Bridlington once to referee Trinity against another team, and my linesman at the time was Geoffrey Thompson. Jeff went on to become chairman of the FA and also a member of FIFA and UEFA, which is amazing, really. He went down that path, but and then they formed the Northern Premier League. And I got a call from Ken Dagnall, the Bolton referee. Great. I really admired him as a person, as a referee. He was a terrific referee. And he just phoned and said, Mr. Hackett, I'm pleased to say that you're going to go on to the linesman's list, that it was. And I went on there for about a season and then into the middle. And I really learned my craft in the Northern Prem, because all of a sudden I was coming over from the Yorkshire League and the amateur sort of game, and now I was going into the semi-professional environment, Altrincham, Macclesfield, Wigan, Northwich Victoria, Stalybridge, and all these teams were like, wow, sometimes difficult to handle because the guys were on a win bonus, and in fact that's all they were going to earn. So the attitude changed, and I think in that period of being on that league, I learned a huge amount. The assessors were good. They would give you a lot of advice. I worked with a lot of assistants who were also contributed towards your career. And then I did Southport in an FA Cup game one midweek evening, and the secretary at the end of the match said, "Oh, there's a guy going to wait for you in the car park." And I thought, "Hey, I've not had that bad a game, have I?" And he goes, "No, you'll be interested." And I walked into the car park, and there was the secretary of the Football League at the time, and he just said to me, "Mr. Hackett, I'm very pleased to tell you that I've seen a really good performance from you, and I think next season you could well be on the Football League." And I think that was in '72. I was put on the line for the Football League. Following year, maybe 2-3 years, I don't know, I was then put onto the supplementary list. And then I really did my first, on the supplementary list, my first game was Stockport County against Northampton. And it all kicked off from there, really. I mean, it was a terrific match. Tried to avoid the distraction of the low-flying aircraft going into Manchester Airport, and then started doing regular runs into Lancashire. You know, Bury. I can remember it was almost like yesterday that I went to Bury for the first time, and I hadn't been there. I didn't recall having been there on the line, but somebody said to me afterwards, "Yeah, you were linesman to Kevin McNally, who was then quite an important referee on the Football League." The first time I refereed at Bury, I arrived very early. I always arrived at 2.5 hours before kickoff. And the groundsman came in and chatted, a really nice guy. And then a bit later on, he said, he came in with a red hot pie, steam coming out of it on a plate. And he said, "Hey, get this down here." And I went, "Just a minute, not before a football match." And he said, "Lad, I ought to eat this," in a Lancashire accent, not a Yorkshire one, "because it's one less pie that anybody can throw at you. Always remember that." And so it was runs into Bury, City, Man City, Man United, Liverpool. And then, of course, we were amateurs. We were amateurs in a professional game. So we had to do our own training with no supervision. So I would get up early in the morning, go for a run around a local football field until I was really exhausted. And then in midweeks, the five-a-side was between car dealers in Sheffield. They all had plots around Sheffield, all selling second-hand cars, except one guy who sold Rolls-Royce and Bentleys. And they would turn up on a Wednesday at the YMCA, and we would play indoor five-a-side. I think that was great training because, you know, it's not physically exerting, but it's mentally, you've got to be really sharp, and it sharpens you up. And, you know, before the game and the games and after the games, you'd have a drink. I think what it did was you got to know players. You suddenly started, you know, to see, hey, just a minute, they've got a different lifestyle. And then you saw how they work together. You know, how one guy would say, you know, "I've got a Triumph Herald, I can't get rid of it. What colour is it? It's blue, fine. Have it on my plot. I'll make space for it. Drive it round in the morning, and we'll put a thing up. But I want 10%." And then the haggle would start. Yeah. But those are the things. And on a Sunday morning in Sheffield, the competition was fierce. So again, enjoyable. And of course, Sheffield's got this reputation and history because the oldest club in the world is Sheffield FC, and the second oldest is Hallam.
Yeah.
And they play at Sandygate, which is the oldest football ground in the world. And usually they played their derbies either on Christmas Day, often, and I seemed to be every year the referee that refereed that particular game, and it was always enjoyable. But it was always like, how do I get to the game? Because I didn't have a car. You know, I'm a youngish guy, got a young family, and couldn't afford a car. So I travelled public transport everywhere, and that meant the days were very long. You know, always wanted to get to games early. Then I got a company car. You know, and I was driving to referee Northwich Victoria against Wigan Athletic, and I drove through Macclesfield, and a policeman waved us through, It's a junction. I go through the junction, get sideswiped with the car. Get to the ground eventually, having pulled it all out and seeing this brand new company car, thinking, well, that's it, I'm going to be fired. And then I sort of refereed this football match, and during the course of the game, I clearly suffered with some sort of reaction to the crash.
Yeah.
And I came off the game at the end of the match, feeling quite unwell, and so I refereed. The guy came in and paid me my fee and said, "I think that's just about the worst refereeing I've ever seen at this ground." Great. And the following week, I hadn't got a game. I got a call on the Thursday, and it was the F.A. saying, "Oh, Keith, are you available to do a game?" And I went, "Yeah, sure, no game." So I'm quite happy. It's F.A. Cup game, Northwich Victoria versus Wigan Athletic. I couldn't believe it. And before I could say I don't want to do it because of the problems I had, I couldn't do anything other than go to the game. And I arrived not as early as norm, was in the dressing room, and the guy came in to offer me a cup of tea, and he went, "Oh, God, did you do referee here last week?" And I went, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I hope you have a better game today." As I walked out onto the middle of the pitch, the announcer said, "Today's referee, you'll recognise him, Keith Hackett from Sheffield. He had an awful game last week. Let's hope he does a bit better this." And that was sort of summed up to some degree the Northern Premier League. It was a terrific sort of competition. Learned a lot. Met a lot of people who were on the way up. You know, it was that type of competition. You know, I went to Boston United, and Jim Smith, who later became Derby's manager, QPR. He was manager of Boston United, and Howard Wilkinson, who's now the president of the LMA, he played on that particular day that I went to Boston. And Boston became quite a regular on. So enjoyable times.
It must have been a really good grounding for you for when you finally were able to get into the Football League levels.
Yeah, I think that you're marked, obviously, and you know, every assessment I still retain. I've got, you know, I because people took the time to actually write and offer advice, and I'm, you know, what's interesting is I'm able to pass that advice on to other people now, you know. And then, of course, I was very fortunate because in 1979, a short time on the Football League, I was appointed to the FA Cup semi-final. That was Arsenal versus Liverpool at Hillsborough. And I have to tell you that Hillsborough is the club that I support, Sheffield Wednesday. And as a youngster, my dad used to walk us to the ground at 3 miles. It was quite an hike. But on the way, we stopped at the pub, and I didn't drink, but I wasn't old enough. But he would have a couple of pints. We'd get to the ground. I would be surfed over the crowd on the Kop to the front. And so when I got this appointment, the semi-final that was going to take place at Hillsborough, I decided where I used to live, the grounds had been, the houses had been raised to the ground, so it was just wasteland. And I parked my car, locked the doors, got my kit, and walked to Hillsborough Stadium. Refereed the match. It was a 0-0 game. It wasn't spectacular, but for me, it was a game that was long in the memory. And that same year, I was appointed to referee run the line on the FA Cup final, Manchester United versus Arsenal, which I think is known as a 5-minute final.
Yeah,
2 years later.
The one with Sunderland.
Yeah, and then 2 years later, I was appointed to the 100th FA Cup final between Tottenham Hotspur and Manchester City. The first game was a draw, and the replay is remembered really with the spectacular goal by Ricky Villa.
I was actually at that match.
Amazing.
I was actually at Wembley for the replay. I wasn't at the first game, but a friend of mine, his brother was in the Navy, and they were both big City fans. He'd gone to the game on the Saturday, but couldn't make the replay. So I got his ticket, and I drove.
Brilliant.
I drove down and I went to that replay. That was my first FA Cup final.
Amazing. And, I mean, I think what people don't realise, but maybe they do following last year, because up to that point, you only got the FA Cup final once. That's the tradition.
Yeah.
Obviously, with COVID last year and the way the cup was formulated, Anthony Taylor was the referee. I think has done it twice, which is exceptional, really.
Yeah.
And that same year, I went out as a guest referee in the States and refereed on the North American Soccer League. One or two interesting stories from that. I think the big one was being stuck in Lincoln Tunnel on my way to Giants Stadium to referee New York Cosmos against, I think, Vancouver Whitecaps. And we were just, there'd been an accident. So we were just in the tunnel when all of a sudden the driver, the chauffeur that was taking me to the ground, jumped out of the car and started shouting. And within a minute, there's this guy sat at the side of me with a pair of boots in his hand. And that guy was the captain of New York Cosmos, Carlos Alberto, a few years before had lifted the World Cup, which is quite remarkable.
Yeah.
But again, football and with FIFA, I've been very lucky in football terms because I've travelled to over 100 countries, not refereeing in all of them, but doing training camps, workshops, most of African countries, Mexico, and out into Asia. So, so I've watched a lot of football. I've participated in a lot of football, and I still love it. I love it, and I'm into the history of the game. So for me, when I suddenly was reading and watching and listening to what was taking place at Bury, a place that I got to know quite well as a referee, but also a place where I've always been treated well by the local referees association. I used to get invited almost on an annual basis to go and talk about the new laws and various other things. So there was that sort of connection. And, the history of the game is so important. And, when we let a club like Bury, there's a lack of understanding, I think, with a lot of people that the football club is the community. That community might not always support football, but it's amazing how it cascades down. We think about the local transport that goes to the ground on a Saturday afternoons carrying people. That means a bus driver and a conductor's employee. And on the way, people that stop at the shops and grab something to eat or a pint or a drink. The economy gains by all that, remarkably. And then, of course, it helps to generate enthusiasm of youngsters playing the game because they've got players who they can look up to. And they always want a copy. And I think, I'm really pleased that Bury has resurrected thanks to a lot of hard work by a lot of volunteers. And I can understand that from a distance because we cannot let clubs just go into oblivion because of what they are, what they've done in the past, the history that they've got, and the positivity that it produces for the community.
Well, one of the things that we're doing, including this particular interview, is we're trying to preserve the heritage of Bury FC, because every Bury AFC fan is a Bury fan, every single one of us.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to be the matchday commentator for a number of years at Gig Lane. And when you talk about the history of the club, it's ingrained in us. I mean, I'm not a native of Bury. I grew up here, but I'm originally from Belfast. But this football club means more to me than anything else apart from my family.
Well,
It's a huge part of everybody's lives.
Well, I mean, you know, when we look at clubs and how they've evolved, and we look at old film clips, black caps, rattles, shops, if they have a run in the FA Cup, all those things, you know. But what I think people fail to understand, because a lot of people think that referees are an unnecessary evil, but we love the game. I don't know a referee that's not passionate about the game. We want to do our very best, but we're human, and sadly, sometimes we don't see. And I think that, you know, the process of a referee is to see, recognize, think, and act. And what you're trying to do is keep, if you like, errors off the card in terms of your performance. But that passion runs through. And, you know, I talk a lot about the clubs that I visited, because, you know, I remember, I think I'll just touch on a subject here, because, you know, when I retired from refereeing, I put forward a paper to the Premier League, because the Premier League was formed and I was due to retire. And the people at the Premier League said, look, Keith, will you do us another couple of years minimum in order for us to help bed this league in? And I did that. And then sometime afterwards, I put a paper together to say, look, modern refereeing is becoming more difficult in relation to getting time. Sometime afterwards, we brought in the Ozone, which was a system that analysed performance. And then after about 18 months, I took over and I said, right, I'm going to operate like the 21st manager of the relegated. And if he didn't do a good job on the Football League, he would lose his job. And of course, sadly, those were the things that I had to put into place. Now the old question is, it's changed. And, you know, we've got 52-year-old referees. I think a few years ago, Nigel Miller was more around 56, 57, still fit. Yeah. But, you know, you lose a bit of edge. And, you know, we've looked in recent months at, obviously, the introduction of VAR and the very poor way that a piece of technology. And Mr. Riley and his managers have 21 million. That is a huge amount of money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, you know, I think when I left, it was around about 5 million. And we had about 10 world-class referees. And of course, the PGMOL also manages referees at the Football League level. So the opportunity to visit countries, I refereed in the Olympic Games. I can recall a game, Gdansk versus Juventus, when the battle with the shipyard leaders was tight, and I suddenly go to Gdansk. I can remember going across Checkpoint Charlie to referee East Germany against Switzerland, and you know, the sort of almost James Bond type walk across the sort of from east to west.
Yeah.
Say west to east, and being met at the other side, and the East German guy saying to me in excellent English, Mr. Hackett, football's an incredible sport. And I've gone, yeah. And he said, but it is something that is different, because a few years ago, the president of the United States was the west side of the Checkpoint Charlie and couldn't come across when he did his major speech.
Yeah.
And you've just walked through it. And then on Unification Night doing East-West Germany. So, you know, a lot of people say it's a lonely career, but it isn't. It's one where I know lots of the people around the world. And now I take great pride in coaching and training referees. And, you know, a few years ago, I did a course in Cameroon. number of referees. There weren't referees, actually. There were people from a village. And I spent a week with them, training them to become referees and incentivizing them to become referees, whilst coaches from football clubs was there coaching the coaches. And I take great pride in that one of those guys now is an international assistant referee. I think that's an interesting question because, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of big games. The cup final, as I've said before, you only get it once, and I got it very early in my career. I was then the joint youngest referee to referee a cup final. And
36, I think, were you? Something like that?
Yeah, 36. So that was, I think, relatively early in my career, and at the time, and still now, it's a game that you take great pride. In the Olympic Games, I'd been informed by Sepp Blatter that I was going to referee the final. So I was really pleased about that. Then sadly, the draw came around. And I got a call from a referee in Mexico, and I got a call, go to the Camino Real Hotel in Mexico City. I met Blatter. Blatter was sort of hesitant, and he then informed me, yes, I was refereeing the semi-final. The only thing I said was that under the flame, the Olympic flame, the Olympic torch, would it take place in the Olympic Stadium? And they go, yes, it would. And that was a really challenging game, but a terrific game. So again, you remember that, going to Bernabeu in Spain, and I was in a hotel, I think probably about a quarter of a mile from the ground, and they've got all the chauffeur-driven cars and everything, and police escorts take me to the ground, and I threw my bag in the.
Is there anyone that really stands out and you think, wow?
I was very fortunate to referee George Best, who was nonchalant in the way he played. He was just like a different class. Maradona, I enjoyed. Obviously upset that he scored the goal with the hand of God, but I had the pleasure of refereeing him. One of my favourite players, though, is Kenny Dalglish. I've no allegiance to Liverpool, but some weeks earlier, I'd refereed Juventus in Italy. And the president of the club, Agnelli, who owned Fiat, Ferrari, and other sort of companies, requested me to his office in the stadium, and I went with a UEFA people and everybody, so I wasn't alone. And this was after the game, but nonetheless, you don't want to be seen to be with the president of a club for all sorts of reasons. And his question was, Mr. Hackett, could you tell me how John Charles was? And funnily enough, that week I'd heard that he'd gone bankrupt. So the testimonial was arranged very quickly. And Kenny Dalglish played. And I was fortunate to referee it. And during the course of that match, he put a ball out to a youngster on the left wing who didn't run for it. And I can tell you, he almost bit his head off, because he was saying it doesn't matter which game you're at and when you're at, you play. You always play. And I always refereed. So he was a class act. There's no doubt about that. But then again, Liverpool were at that height. I used to like going to both Manchester clubs, and they probably have Ferguson and the era of Doherty and the like. So I saw a couple of managers at Old Trafford. I had the pleasure of doing a soccer camp in Canada with him, and he worked his socks off. Again, long days showing kids how to be top class goalkeepers. So lots of good things. And then you get the harder players, on the pitch, Graham Souness. If I was on a game, it might be covered with Match of the Day, and it might be 3 cameras, and there might be 20 minutes on a Saturday evening. Now there's 22 cameras, and those cameras expose the errors that referees make. But I do think at the moment we're going through a phase where there's an aging problem in terms of the group at the very highest level. Succession planning is not working as well as it could. Some referees are just being carried, in my opinion, and need to be dropped and pensioned off. And yeah, you know, I'm ultimately at the end of the day, and that has to be the view. And I just like a bit more transparency. You know, I mean, look, it's simple to me, VAR. We've got rugby. We listen to what we can listen in, we can watch the big screen, and we can see the whole process. We can see that in cricket, yet football says, no, we can't, you know. And why? Why not? At the top level, we want to know what's going on. We want to keep the integrity of the game. And part of that is being told, you know, go and get your head straight and understand you've got to referee. I don't want you back as soon as possible, but you've got to be in the right frame of mind. And hey, I want you sharp. The problem with VAR is until they get a panel of specialist VAR operators, we will always have problems. We will always have problems until the guys who are VAR understand that their only involvement is on serious and obvious errors.
Yeah.
And then what we've got to do is get these referees trained to understand what handball is. Because if I was Sean Dyche yesterday and watched that handling offence and I don't get a penalty kick, and then I read the nonsense of what's going on, the ball bounced up and hit his arm and all that, I just look at it and think, stop talking a load of nonsense. Say as it is, the referee's got it wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and then the other thing, okay, Mike Dean, it's handball. The VAR comes in and says it's handball. Great. Now look at the law in terms of denial of an. Doesn't see an incident, he's not going to get it right. So he's then guessing.
Yeah.
And as a referee, you can't guess. And so that's the shortfall in terms of refereeing, because of the speed of the game, no matter how much ought to be able to rectify the potential error. But at the moment, well, you know, one of the things when they talked about VAR, I said the only danger they've got is that it will promote lazy refereeing. Nigel Owens, the Welsh referee who's just retired,
Nigel Owens
explains it brilliantly, how TMO evolved in rugby. And he said, look, think of the referee on a tightrope. And he's on that tightrope and he's got to move backwards and forwards. There's no doubt he's focused on ensuring that he's not going to fall off, which means he's focused on not making an error. His concentration's high, focus is high, and he's ready and he's doing the job of walking up and down that tightrope. If you introduce a safety net, he loses some of that sharpness. He becomes reliant on the net. He knows that if he's not done it, someone else will pull him out of the mire. And if he falls off the tightrope, he'll fall into the net. That's where we're at with VAR at the moment. He's lazy and not knowing how to use it. In America, right, where they're operating it much better, they don't work with these offside lines. They let a qualified assistant referee have another look. And then what they do is they say, right, okay, I think 1 in every 3 games that they play, once only in 3 games, does VAR come in and be involved.
Yeah.
Now that means they're operating VAR correctly and their referees are refereeing much better in some instances than our guys.
Yeah. The problem I have with VAR is, and I don't know whether it's because I'm a bit of a football purist, but I want the games that are at Wembley and the Bernabeu and the Parc de France and all the rest of it. I want that to be the same game that kids play in the park on a Sunday morning. It's the same game. They're governed by the same laws, but I mean, we have it in the FA Cup. If a championship team are drawn at home and don't have VAR,
we don't have it.
They might miss the referee might miss a handball. It might cost the championship club a chance of going through to the next round. If the fixture was reversed and the Premiership club was at home and they do have VAR, then they have the opportunity to get it. It should either be the same for every team or the same for no team. So that's
in a way, I mean, I've written that. I've said that earlier in the season, and so I share those views. And the same applies. But then, in Africa, I can once remember going to watch a football match. There was no grass on the pitch. It was muddy. It was just like a sort of used playing field, I suppose. And I watched these kids playing, and then the ball come towards me, and I caught it. And that ball was made of cloth and sellotape. I was shocked.
Yeah.
They couldn't afford a ball. I went. I mean, hey, I was working for the Premier League as their referee ambassador. I went to the nearest sports shop and bought about a dozen balls. And you ought to see it then. I just kicked them on. They thought it was the world.
Yeah.
We do take a lot for granted.
Yeah. Years ago, I was involved with raising some money for some youngsters in Kenya to buy football kits, and we sent them over to Kenya. It was a place about 250 miles from Nairobi, middle of nowhere. The joy on the photographs that we got sent with these kids, just with a £2.50 football, it was brilliant.
Absolutely. All right, for a football world, China on occasions, and they're always interested in terms and John Gubber, who's has links with Manchester United. I think their television and various things, does lots of terrific work, and John filmed with us with the Chinese crew in and around Sheffield. I mean, he also came across and looked at Manchester's involvement in the game and the like. So we covered the history, and they were really, I mean, the first showing reached, I think it was 3 billion people.
Yeah, I can believe it. Yeah,
it's just phenomenal. And they played that film 5 times. So around the world we've got this history, and it's trying to link that history, and this is why that I wish the people who are involved with Bury every success. I mean, I think that a lot of clubs in the coming years will move towards being true community clubs run by people who love football for all the right reasons, and not property developers or big business come in on the basis of what can we get and how can we make use of that asset and make money out of the club.
Yeah,
because that's what a lot of them are doing.
We're running out of time, Keith, but being the man in the middle, obviously you will have been subjected to abuse over the thing, but you must have seen some funny things on the pitch and heard some funny things on the stand from the stands. Anything that really sticks in your mind?
Well, I think that they're paid the money and allowed to shout, as far as I'm concerned, spectators. And if we take up refereeing and think that we're going to be the star of the game, then we should never do that. We're part and parcel of the game. I can remember my very first visit to Anfield, and in about the 4th or 5th minute, I've given a free kick against Liverpool, and And then we became quite friends. I mean, okay, his career finished. He became manager of Rotherham United. I always resided in Sheffield. And then he started playing in local football. That's hard to believe, the England captain playing. But we all love the game, and he did. And so he played for a local pub team. And I'd come across him in Saturday. You know, because let me tell you, even though I was an international referee, I can remember I would always come back and referee in local football. So if I hadn't got a Football League game, or a Premier League game, or an international game, then I got a pub game. I got a local grassroots game, whatever teams it were. And I used to come across Emlyn quite frequently because I also refereed Derek Dooley, who's a famous player.
Yeah.
And Derek had a team of All-Stars, and I used to referee those on a regular basis. But he always smiled, because he would occasionally come up to me and go, Mr. Hackett, my name is Emlyn Hughes. And he always remembered that. And he said it impacted him, because he said, how could this young referee have the guts to be able to pull the England captain so early in the game and caution him? And I think it's those sort of things where you gain a bit of amusement, but you also gain a lot of respect. And I'd just like to see referees being a little bit more open. I was very fortunate. One of my mates in refereeing sadly passed away too early, Neil Misley from Salford, and Neil was a raconteur, but he was also a great comedian, and he had all the clips going in the book, and it was fabulous, because you learned expressions, you learned things in terms of that. And then one other thing was out in America, I was informed that the San Diego Chicken would be making an appearance at half-time, and I just dismissed that completely until I walk out to restart the game in Toronto, and there's this sort of big yellow bird, I suppose fancy dress, but a mascot in other words, but not for the club. He was famous in sport in America. And I go up to him to inform him that I want to get the game started. And his beak hit my forehead. He fell backwards, threw some feathers in the air, and I was done. I'd actually headbutted the San Diego Chicken, which everybody thought was amusing, but started booing me for that. So, yeah, many occasions, many joyful occasions, for sure, in football.
That's been absolutely brilliant. Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you talk, and thanks so much for taking time out of your day to speak to us here at Bury AFC.
All the best to Bury. All the best. Thanks, Maurice.
Yeah, thanks very much, Keith. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.